right. Thank you, Chuck. Good morning and Happy New Year. So what I wanted to talk about today was really to share something that's been going on for a while for me, vis-a-vis the Spirituality and Health magazine column that I write, and of course you all subscribe to, called Roadside Assistance for the Spiritual Traveler. So it's a Q&A, right? People send me questions. And I'm going to read you a generic version of a question I've been getting for months. So this is not from anyone in particular, but it's just captures the wealth of them that have been coming through. So it says, my beloved child, spouse, parent, sibling, grandparent, whatever it is, my beloved is dying from COVID. None of the standard prayers speak to me. What can I offer them that might ease their dying and comfort me in my grieving? And that's the question that was sent. So whenever someone sends me a question, I always do my best to respond personally, directly to that individual. And then if I think the question has a broader purchase, then I share it with my editor at the magazine. And if she agrees, then I'll come up with a response for the, to print in the magazine. So we're going to go through my response. I've decided to put that question in the next issue of the magazine, April issue. And, and the response is what I'm going to share with you in a moment. But I don't know if any of you have gone through this. I think, well, someone already said they did. I'm now sorry, I can't remember who said this, but an aunt passed away. Oh, I hate that word. An aunt died. I also had an aunt die from COVID in 2020. It was just bizarre. I mean, sad if I thought about it, but if I don't even think about it, if I just share the fundamental feeling I had as it was happening, it was just bizarre because, and this is someone, my family is very small. They all live within 10 minutes of each other. I was the only one who ever left home. And I would visit, throughout the year, and I would see my aunt as well as, my mom. She's still alive. And when she died like so many people who die of COVID in the hospital die, alone in isolation without any family contact. That is something that must have been, well, not must have been, that is something that was unique to her experience. Because she's always with family. And then the funeral happened, and the funeral was equally bizarre. The rabbi was in her office at her house. The cantor was in her office at her house. There was the funeral director who had some workers at the graveside, and he held an iPhone, and we watched over Zoom, I guess, as she was buried, and the rabbi, then it switched to the rabbi as in the screen, and the rabbi read something, and the cantor sang something. It was the most cold, I felt, meaningless service that I'd ever been to. Couple that with, and this is not about COVID, but a couple of years ago, my dad died, and he died of cancer. And he died alone by choice. I mean, we were all with him, and then he said, we should all go home. And in the 15 minutes it took for me to drive my mother back to their apartment, my dad had died. And that was because I think he wanted to be alone when it was happening. But in the hours leading up to his death, and in the traditional Jewish service, the funeral, we were present. And then after the funeral, there's 7 days of mourning where people come over and there's prayers every day. Through all of that, I found the ritual and the prayers meaningless. Now, not to my dad. My dad was an Orthodox Jew. He would have appreciated the whole thing. But I thought it was meaningless. And just to give you an idea of what I have in mind, the very first night, so he dies, during the day, and then there's a funeral the next day, because Jews bury ideally within 24 hours. And the next night, people started coming over. And my sister, we were doing this at my sister's house. My sister is a very big person in the Jewish community in Springfield, Massachusetts. For 30 years, she was the director of the Jewish preschool in the Jewish Community Center. So she had a lot of contacts, and they all wanted to come and, pay their respects. And the last person to arrive was, and this is now late in the evening, was a Chabad rabbi. So Chabad is a very Orthodox Hasidic, leaning toward the mystical side of Judaism. And he came last, not because he was doing something else, but there were several rabbis. I mentioned the fact that the rabbi who did the funeral for my aunt was a woman. That's my sister's rabbi. So the rabbi was a woman in the house, and the cantor was a woman in the house. And this Chabad rabbi could not bring himself to speak to a woman and call her rabbi, which would have been the proper thing. So he said, I'm just going to wait till everyone leaves. So he waited till almost everyone was gone, but certainly the clergy. And then he came in, and he was very nice. He was a young guy. He was very nice, other than being a misogynist, but he was very nice. And he gathered the immediate family into a private room to pray. And he started out fairly intelligently. He said, my parents are both living. I don't know what it is to lose a parent. So I don't know exactly what prayer to offer that will be of help to you. But we all love Israel. So let's pray for Jerusalem. This was absolutely absurd. First of all, not all Jews care about Israel, but put that aside. Here was the family really the funeral was earlier that day. The grief was intense. And here's a rabbi who, instead of starting off with some humility, instead of just leaving it at that and offering, some prayer on behalf of the family or on behalf of my dad or something, took this generic route of praying for peace in Jerusalem. And it was sort of like the last straw, because I hadn't heard any prayers that spoke to me. And this certainly was absolutely meaningless. Theoretically, Jews are always saying, we have the most sophisticated, psychologically astute approach to dying, death, and bereavement. And that looks good on paper. But as I went through it with my dad, it was not the case. There was nothing in the tradition that spoke to me that I could even say with any kind of integrity. Earlier that day, or the day before, when he was in his last hours, I sat at his bedside on one side of his bed, and my sister was at the other side of the bed. My mom had taken a break, and my sister picked up some pamphlets that some rabbis had left for us to read. Now, these were prayer pamphlets. And I wasn't reading them, but I could watch my sister. She'd pick it up, she'd look at it and throw it, and she'd pick up another. What? You could see on her face that this was meaningless to her. And she's very Jewish. So she said to me finally, "What are you doing?" I'm holding my dad's hand, as was she. I said, "What are you doing? If you're not saying these prayers, or if you are saying these prayers, how do I make sense out of them? And if you're not saying these prayers, what are you saying?" So what I was saying is a meta practice from Buddhism that we use at the end of this reading that I'm going to share with you in a moment. But there was nothing in the Jewish liturgy that worked for me, for my sister, later for my mother included, when this rabbi came to pray for Jerusalem instead of my dad. So when people were writing to me in the magazine, I couldn't turn to any liturgy, even if they identified as a Jew or a Christian or whatever it was. I couldn't find anything that I could share that had any authenticity or share with any integrity on my part. And eventually I had to write something that I did feel authentic about. And that's what I want to go through with you here. So I guess we'll read through it throughout the next 20 minutes, but I want to take it apart as we do. So each paragraph starts with "Listen, beloved." Now, beloved is there because I don't know who you're saying this for. So, you might insert a name, but this is generic. So that's where the beloved comes from. But the listen is what I want to focus on for a moment. So I wrote this as something you could read to a dying person. If I had had this at the time when my dad was dying, I would have read it to him. If I had this when my aunt was dying, I would have asked a nurse to hold, put a phone by her ear, and I would have read it to her. So my thought is that you would read this to someone who's dying, either face, in person, if that's possible, or over the phone, if it's not possible, or even, and I'm not sure about the theology of this, but I'm just going to go with it, even simply by yourself, with the person in mind. If we're all interconnected, and I think we are, then maybe if we drop a pebble of compassion at one end of the sea of existence, the ripples will reach, farther out, and you might touch the person you're saying this to, even if it's only in your imagination. And with that in mind, according to the Tibetan Buddhists, you can actually read something like this after they've deceased. My original intent was to read from the Tibetan Book of the Dead until I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I had done when I was a teenager. I thought, how cool. But as an adult, I thought, no, this doesn't work for me either. So this is my remake of the Tibetan Book of the Dead in a sense. So listen, because I'm hoping there's someone there who can listen. Hearing is the first sense, as I understand it, hearing is the first sense to appear in the womb. And unless you're going deaf for some other reason, it's the last sense that leaves you when you're dying. So the Tibetan Buddhists think there's a consciousness there that you're addressing, and I'm going to go with that. So listen, beloved, and yield to the truth of what is happening. The person's dying. Trust my words. Rest in my voice. Be still and know that all is God. So for some of you already, God, that's problematic. Now, I oftentimes use the word God. I have to define it, and I will in a second. But again, this is a piece that I wrote for Spirituality and Health magazine, and God is not a problem for most of the people who read the magazine. For me, God, the word that speaks to me best about God is the Hebrew word chayut, which means aliveness. It's the Hebrew equivalent of Tao in the Chinese. And the best definition of chayut and Tao comes from the book of Acts, chapter 17, verse 28, where, depending on which side of the divide you're on, either Rabbi Saul of Tarsus or St. Paul, same guy, different titles, defines God as that in whom we live and move and have our being. I think I like that. It's like reality, basically. So when I use the word God, which I don't often do here, but I did in the beginning, when I use the word God, I'm thinking of the Tao more than anything else. Listen, beloved, you are not only the smaller self with its sensing, feeling, thinking, and doing. You are also the greater self beyond all sensing, feeling, thinking, and doing. You're not only the name you carried, but the unnamed that carries you. Like the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, so the unnamed Tao. Listen, beloved, you are to this world what a wave is to the ocean that waves it, a precious and never to be repeated happening of the one happening as all happening. So in the Hebrew, one of the names for God is the YHVH, horribly rendered as Lord, which has nothing to do with it. It's a verb. YHVH is a verb. It means to happen. So another way to understand the divine is this dynamic happening as each of us. In the prayer that Chuck read at the opening of the service by the UU pastor, I've forgotten her name, she talks about being an extension of the one. And that's what I'm talking about here. Same idea, that your relationship to the divine is the same as a wave to the ocean. You are the divine in extension. That understanding is crucial to the rest of this piece, right? If you imagine that you are separate from nature, if you are other than nature, that you come from outside this world and are plopped into it, this isn't going to make any sense. The book of Genesis gives you two options. Of course, you could find another book with more options or not look to a book. But in the book of Genesis, you get two options. Chapter 1 of Genesis is what I call the alien invasion. And that's where you're created by the word of an anthropomorphic God who then plops you on the earth. And you're an alien. And then God tells you what you're supposed to do, which is to be fruitful and multiply and to dominate, the planet. Chapter 2, Genesis chapter 2, gives you what's called the organic vision of human origins. And that is that you were created from the dust of the earth. And then it says in the second chapter, the reason that you were created is to tend and protect the planet. So it's two very, very different visions of what creation is like, is about, humanity is about. And I go for the second. Listen, beloved, you are a way the one laughs and weeps and loves and suffers. You are a way the one knows itself as the many. You are a way the one knows itself as each part. And soon you will be a way the part comes to know itself as the one. You are becoming what you have always been, the non-dual aliveness, forever birthing and dying. To me, death is simply an awakening to your truest self, your truest nature. When can you just scroll this up a little bit, Chuck? When, if a wave could know itself, the way you and I might know ourselves, it would know itself to be the ocean, not all of the ocean, but it would be nothing other than the ocean, because there is nothing other than the ocean. And that's what this whole reading is about, to help the dying person realize who they really are. Listen, beloved, you have had many experiences in life. Some matched your desires, others did not. Some fulfilled your goals, others did not. Some upheld your values, others did not. Some brought you great joy, others brought you great suffering. These may arise in your mind as memories, reflections, yearnings, and regrets. Do not cling to what arises. Only acknowledge the arising. Say yes to what was without excuse or explanation. You don't want to turn this into a drama. Listen, beloved, as you die, the faces of loved ones may come to you. Welcome each face with I love you. Don't cling, excuse, or explain. Without clinging, excuse, and explanation, there's only love. Listen, beloved, as you die, the faces of those you may have hurt come to you. Welcome each face with I'm sorry. Don't cling, excuse, or explain. Without clinging, excuse, or explanation, there's only forgiveness. Listen, beloved, as you die, the faces of those you may have hurt, who may have hurt you. Whoops, I'm going to get dizzy if you do that. Come to you. Welcome each face with I forgive you. Don't cling, excuse, or explain. Without clinging, excuse, and explanation, there's only peace. The repetition of the notion of clinging, excusing, and explaining, that's sort of what we do in our daily lives. We cling to the things we like. We push away the things we don't like. We try to excuse things that happen to us, or we try to explain why they happen to us. My understanding is there is no explanation. Stuff happens. People always want, why did this horrible thing happen? Well, we don't say, why did this great thing happen? We just assume the great things are inheritance. We're supposed to get those. And so we worry about the negatives. But there is no explanation. Stuff happens because the conditions for it to happen are so strongly present that the thing has to happen. The universe isn't random. Einstein said, God doesn't play dice with the universe, meaning that the universe isn't random. To me, that's a huge error on his part. He should know better. The roll of a dice is not random, right? There's probability theory. Eventually there's going to be more sevens than twos. So The universe isn't random. If the universe were actually random, an elephant could simply appear in your living room right now, but it's not going to happen. The reason it's not going to happen is because the conditions are such that an elephant just can't pop into your living room. If you live by a zoo or if you live by a circus and the elephants are loose and they're rampaging through Tullahoma, maybe an elephant could show up in your living room. But if that isn't the case, the odds are infinitesimal. I don't know if they're as bad as winning the lottery tonight, but it's not good. The odds are against an elephant popping into your room. Things happen because the conditions for them happening are such that they really have to happen. So don't explain while you're dying. You don't need to explain why you did what you did or why other people did what they did or any of that. You simply have to acknowledge reality that was. Listen, beloved, as you die, you may begin to forget, but you will not be forgotten. So we're switching gears here totally. I'm addressing concerns that people have sent to me about dying, that, I'll die and no one will remember me and all of that. So as you die, you may begin to forget, but you will not be forgotten. You may begin to let go, but you will not be abandoned. You may begin to drift, but you will never be set adrift. You are loved. I am here. You are not alone. Listen, beloved, soon you may find yourself without moorings. This is because moorings are of the past and you are entering the eternal present. But you can still hear my voice. Attend to my voice. Trust my voice. Let my voice guide you. So there's this, again, back to where we started, there's this whole notion about hearing, and if you can rest in the voice that you hear, you can guide there, according to the Tibetans, and you can guide the dying process. Now, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they're trying to guide you either into full enlightenment or into a better rebirth. And I don't know if you've ever read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's a fascinating book to read, but as you read it, this is not a quote, I'm just humorously paraphrasing, but what you're saying, listen, my beloved, you see the light, move toward the light, don't get distracted, go into the light, oh man, you missed the light. Okay, you're going to see two doors, go to the one on the left, that's a good rebirth, go to the one on the left, oh man, you picked the one on the right. And it just takes you on this thing, and it's just a progressive missing of opportunities until in the end you get reborn in whatever life it is. But I don't believe in reincarnation. I'm not one who thinks that you don't come back to any life because you aren't a separate being to begin with, right? You're like the wave never comes back. The ocean continues to wave, but no wave ever returns. And, that's reincarnation. There's recycling. In other words, all the water, all the hydrogen and oxygen atoms maybe are recycled. Waving continues to happen, but no wave is returned, is repeated. And I don't think you've had you are a precious, unique, unrepeatable being, expression of this divine reality, or of just reality. You don't even need the adjective divine. And so when you die, right? When I die, Rami is done. But Rami is not the whole of who I am, not by a long shot. So Rami is just the veneer on top of the singular, non-dual aliveness that is everything. So as you die, you slip out of these moorings, all the labels, all the stories, all the things that you allow to define you. And all of those things are in the past. And dying is dying into the eternal present, the waving itself, the oceanic itself. Then, second page, last page, listen, beloved, you're yielding to the light. No, I don't know if that's true. So just like throwing the word God into the first paragraph, I'm using the word light here because it's common and near-death experience, which I do think is... when people share their near-death experiences, I think they're sharing things they're actually experiencing. And from what I've read, the vast majority of people who have a near-death experience do experience some kind of light at the end of a tunnel, and they're moving toward that light. But because it's near death, they always come back. So you don't know what happens when they reach that light. Is there an actual light? I don't know. Is light an archetype that's sort of built into our consciousness? So that's how we experience those last moments of either actually dying or just before we come back. It could be that. But light is what so many people talk about. Light is sort of common, so I'm sticking with that, though I have no experience of that personally. So you're yielding to the light. Allow the light to draw you closer. Again, this paragraph is for from near-death experiencers. You may perceive the presence of others. Some you know, some you don't. They're here to comfort you as I am here to comfort you. Acknowledge them. Feel their love and welcome their support, but don't cling to them. They're here to honor your dying, but they have no place in your death. Let them come, let them go. Listen, beloved, the closer you get to the light, the lighter you will feel. You were a being. Now you are being itself. You were a mind. Now you are consciousness itself. You were happy and sad. Now you are only bliss. This comes from the Hindu tradition. So in Hinduism, the enlightenment experience is called Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means pure being, Chit is pure consciousness, Ananda is pure bliss. They say this is what happens when you're enlightened, but it's also what happens when you die, because both the enlightenment experience and the death experience, or the dying experience, are very, very similar in that the egoic sense of who you are disappears. In the enlightenment, it's momentary, but in death, it's permanent. But the experience is always Sat Chit Ananda, pure consciousness, pure being, pure consciousness, pure bliss. In the Jewish tradition, it's called the kiss of God. In the second chapter of Genesis, God breathes consciousness into the earthling. Literally, Adam means earthling, person made from Adamah, earth. God breathes consciousness into the earthling, and then according to the Jewish tradition, when you die, God kisses you on the mouth, and where God exhaled consciousness into you, you then exhale your egoic consciousness back into the divine. And so Rami disappears, the egoic you disappears. And the greater you, which is the divine itself, or reality itself, is all that's left. And that, from the Hindu point of view, the experience that the I has, the ego has, just before the final dissolution, is one of whatever that actually feels like, Sat Chit Ananda, pure being, pure consciousness, pure bliss. And then it ends, listen, beloved, my voice may be fading. My love is not. Let me release you with this prayer. And this is a version of Buddhist metta practice. This is what I was saying at my dad's bedside when my sister asked me what I'm doing. Metta practice, and there's a lot of versions of the words, you can create your own, but metta practice is about liberating people from suffering and then allowing joy to come in. So may you be free from fear. May you be free from compulsion. May you be blessed with love. May you be blessed with peace. That's metta practice, to which I added, you were loved, you are loved, you are love. That's an addition. But may you be free from fear. May you be free from compulsion. The idea is that the egoic self is never free from fear. And because it's afraid, it's always under the pressure of compulsive action, that we have a fearful emotion and we react based on that emotion. We don't think, we just end up doing things. So to be free from fear is to be blessed with love, because the opposite of fear is love. If I don't fear you, then I can only experience you as a fellow wave of this singular ocean. And love is the feeling that comes out, not romantic love, but love is deep, deep compassion. May you be free from compulsion. If you don't you're not driven by compulsivity, then you're left only with peace. And in Hebrew, the word for peace is shalom. It comes from the root word shalem, which means wholeness. So it's not a peace in contrast to strife. It's a peace that includes everything. It's a wholeness. I guess to use New Testament language, it's a peace that surpasses understanding. To me, freeing yourself from fear, compulsion, being blessed with love and peace, that to me is sort of the same thing as Sat Chit Ananda, that these are very, very similar. And then I ended it with, you were loved, you are loved, you are love. This last part, the last 3 verses here, are as much for the reader as for the dying person. In fact, the whole thing is also for the reader. I'm hopeful that if you ever use this, but if persons are reading this to someone, that they're hearing it themselves and realizing before the dying becomes acute, their dying becomes acute, because we're all dying. But before that dying becomes acute, to realize who we really are. That's what the Sufis call dying before you die. The actual death is sadly the worst time to try to wake up. It's better to practice dying to the smaller self and awakening to the greater self, dying to the sense of alienation and awakening to the non-dual reality that everything is a manifesting of this one dynamic aliveness. It's better to know that now than at the last minute, so that you can experience some of that Sat Chit Ananda, pure being, pure consciousness, pure bliss in your everyday life now, and then sort of prime the pump to experience it when you actually die.